when the rumors were circulating, I made a video about how World War I would be a terrible setting for a Battlefield game. Then the trailer dropped. I still stand by my comments in that video, as I was slightly disappointed when I saw the next Battlefield game going back to the past like the angry video game nerd. However, I'm going to reserve my judgment until the beta period when I can actually play the game. My rationale behind not liking the World War I setting has to do with it being hard to take elements of that period to make your stereotypical Battlefield game if they were to stay true to the reality of the war. A few journalists came out this week with a very different take on why they weren't happy with the World War I setting. It goes too far. That's right, World War I is too much to stomach for some of these writers. World War I was a brutal war, won by attrition, not really strategy or firepower, where the people on the front lines would be stuck in trenches and left to die from diseases, if not from the now banned chemical weapons or a grenade or artillery shot coming in from above. Millions died for causes that weren't the good versus evil that World War II offers with Nazis or Imperial Japan, nor to stop the pandemic known as terrorism in the modern day, but rather because some rich fucks got bored one day and wanted to take some land. The trailer glorified war, a war whose outcomes gave way to the rise of the most evil organization in history, Nazi Germany. However, all these reasons are complete bullshit, and allow me to thoroughly debunk all of them. Battlefield 1 isn't true enough to the war for this crowd, as evidenced by this tweet here, quote, "Will Battlefield 1 feature gas attacks where the death sequence takes hours and is unbearable for the player," end quote. Yet, in the same fucking paragraph, they state that the gruesome close-up deaths were harder to watch than the chainsaw executions in Gears of War. Are you fucking kidding me? You completely contradicted yourself in a matter of sentences. Which one is it? Should Battlefield 1 be more realistic, or should it scale back on the brutal violence in the game that everybody seems to think it's glorifying? The games in the Battlefield series, by their nature, are grounded in realism, with things like destructible environments, staying true to the weaponry, and bullet drops on sniper rifles, just to name a few. However, there are elements in the game that are extrapolated in order to facilitate the game playing better. You can't just smack a person with a defib back to life if they've been blown up by an RPG or set on fire from an incendiary grenade. You can't pull all sorts of equipment and beepity bops out of a single ammo box. You can't use a repair tool to stitch up a tank which had its treads blown out by mines. And you can't deploy infinite parachutes to make you land safely, nor run forever. Battlefield 1 seems to be more of the same Battlefield formula in that matter. Stay grounded in realism where it makes for good gameplay mechanics and extrapolate on others. This is why the game isn't entirely trench warfare, even though the majority of World War I was. It grasps at other concepts that occurred during that war, like dogfighting airplanes, having tanks that were actually useful instead of breaking down all the time, battling on ships at sea, and incorporating all sorts of prototype weapons that are all rounding out the game to basically destroy most of my concerns regarding variety from the trenches we all associate with the First World War. To be so true to the World War setting would be something outside of Battlefield's normal realm of game design, and it doesn't make sense for them to do it either. Not to mention, how are other conflicts not so brutal? World War II featured the first and last time atomic bombs were used on civilians during war. How about napalm strikes during the Vietnam War, where people were burned alive from fire above and villages were completely destroyed from the flames? These writers complain about mustard gas. What about the cruise missiles in Battlefield 4? It's basically a drone strike. You know, those instruments of war that are used on unsuspecting people who live constantly in fear because there's shit circulating around them in the air, ready to go off at any minute. And studies have shown that we don't even know the identities of 4 of the 5 people we kill with these drone strikes. Somehow that's not as bad as mustard gas, though. The other main point here was the rationale behind the war. In World War II games, you're playing the good guys, the Allies, trying to destroy the evil Nazi regime, which is actually just a direct response of how shittily the English and French treated the Germans during the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, which we know from the incessant bitching in these articles was just really just a war of petty politics. So the petty politics led to evil organizations. I'm not saying that the Allies are worse than Nazi Germany, but if you remove the context and just make the war good versus evil, then you're missing out on all the fault behind it. You could say the same thing for the US versus Japan, where Japan has constantly made the villain because of the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor killing innocent people. Until you go back to my previous point with the nuclear bomb and the United States killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people with the most powerful weapon mankind has used to date. Kind of clouds the narrative a bit, doesn't it? Modern military games, of course the Western world is the good guys and the terrorists are the bad ones, but again, shades of gray here. There's motivation on both sides that the other side is really the evil ones if you think about things from each other's perspective. Same goes with Battlefield Hardline and Cops and Robbers once you think more about the militarization of police and the war on drugs. So doesn't this fit more with the seeds of conflict for World War I than it does to go against it? Not to mention, if there's no clear-cut good or evil, this lends itself to tell a story from multiple perspectives, giving the player on how we got here from all of the angles, instead of reducing the narrative like these other conflicts down to one perspective of good versus evil. This is great for game design as it opens up tons of different ways to create an experience that will add replayability and longevity. Here's a quote from one of the articles. "There's no good or bad guys. It's just a war populated by people. You're not killing Nazis, you're not saving the world, you're not stopping genocide. What you're doing is shooting at people who are just like you," end quote. Isn't all of this context always lost when playing a multiplayer game? When I'm playing Call of Duty World at War, I don't give a fuck which side I'm randomly assigned to. I kill the motherfucker that's placed in front of me. For Battlefield games, the only way that you realize which team you're actually fucking playing for is in a game like Battlefield 3 or Hardline, because you only have certain weapons available for you to use because they tried to make the game more realistic in only using that team's weaponry. But that's about it. Your characters may look different in the game, but there's no sense of good versus evil in a multiplayer setting. And that's all we've seen thus far. A teaser for that aspect of Battlefield 1. Another writer says he doesn't support censorship, but doesn't like how the trailer is shot with action sequences in order to reduce one of humanity's darkest moments into a fun video game. Right, I don't want you to not make World War I games, but I only want you to make them in this specific way. Of course video games are supposed to be fun. Why the fuck would anyone else play them? But they have an opportunity to tell a narrative to the player about what they're seeing. War is brutal, and having these elements in the game will no doubt showcase to the people who may not be familiar with the conflicts or the horrors of what war is actually like. Getting your fucking face beaten in with a mace and having flesh fly up on the screen is definitely a way of saying, oh shit, war fucking sucks. Perhaps they could begin to empathize with the toll that is taken when soldiers are needlessly sent off into battle. Considering that this war was not a moral conflict, but powerful people making pawns out of those that are less fortunate, this will hopefully leave a lasting impact with players of how bad things can get. At the end of the day, this is entertainment, and if that entertainment can make people think about their worldview of the particular subject, then that's great. But the goal is to entertain, not to educate.